in the world attacking your child, trying to change, and these Skinnerian techniques of brainwashing have been proven. They were actually tested in Chicago. This was what they had, mastery learning, which was outcome-based education. The Clinton Governor School was another form of outcome-based education, actually a preliminary form. And that's what's being, now that they've worked out all the kinks, now they know that they can change the mind of the student. Who was it that said, give me a child from birth to 7 years old, and he's mine for life? That was Karl Marx. And they are aiming at our children. What is actually the teaching that is going on? In fact, you don't need to worry about the curriculum of Common Core. Why? Because in Denver, Colorado, they have a system where they can change the curriculum in a second, every school in the country. So what you see as the curriculum today may not be the curriculum tomorrow. We need to fight the agenda itself. Now, what is Agenda 21? How is it going to affect us? Well, it'll eliminate our right to private, personal, and public private property. And the thing is, most people don't believe that this is happening. I was at the Freedom 21 conferences headed up by Henry Lamb, and Dr. Michael Kaufman was the fellow that actually had done most of the work on the biodiversity treaty and seeing how the land was given over to United Nations organizations for the land use for animals, but being restricted for public use, for people to be using it. And I thought, well, this may happen, in 100 years or so. Right now, the timetable is speeding up, and if they get a constitutional convention, it could happen very quickly. And that's what they're going for, is a constitutional convention, because otherwise it will take them about 20 years conservatively to get all of this implemented. Right now, they've gone from, we're in a transition phase. They've been collecting data on us up until now. Now it's going to go into enforcement. Elimination or private right to private property ownership, forbidding you from entering world land and wetland areas, punishing you with higher prices at the store, restricting your civil liberties, restricting the number of children you can have, because in these smart growth communities, there's going to be a certain amount of land that you can use to grow crops, but if you have a certain number of people you can feed, one parking person. Instead of having 4-lane traffic like we have now, it'll be 2 lanes, and there'll be bicycle trails. It doesn't matter that you live in Maine and the snow is up to your nose. You're going to have to ride your bicycle. So we're going back to a certain amount of carbon credits that you can use, and the energy that's going to be used is equivalent to what we had in the 1800s. So, telling you how much you can harvest on your farm, forcing you to participate in community projects, diminishing your individual rights in favor of community rights. This is communitarianism. This is nothing more than communism. It's what's being implemented in communist China, in the former Soviet Union, and Nazi Germany. The community is the heartland, takes precedence over individuals. Of course, in this country, we were a constitutional republic. And of course, that is the idea that we were preserving the rights of the human, of the people, against the government. Communism is just the opposite. It's protecting the government from the people. We were implementing the Bill of Rights, and several of our founding fathers didn't want to implement the Bill of Rights simply because they thought they might miss one, because anything that wasn't directly given to the federal government was either the states or individual rights. So, we see certain things are going into effect right now, and eventually we're going to have a world tax, a world court, a world army, a world central bank with a common currency, world welfare state, compulsory worldwide economic planning, abolition of private firearms, mandatory population control, and of course, as we're seeing, control of education. And of course, the Agenda 21 was the United Nations plan for setting up a one world government. In fact, United Nations, or the United States becomes part of the New World Order. It would be allowed to, once the United States does become part of this New World Order, it would never be allowed to secede. It's the New World Order forever. The ultimate move to strengthen the UN is to give it a monopoly on military power. In a letter to the White House, John McCloy, special advisor to the President on disarmament, admitted that the fundamental purpose of the disarmament agency would be to bring about a one-world government. The former disarmament proposal was later published in a 19-page report entitled Freedom from War. I have this. United Nations Program for General and Complete Disarmament in a Peaceful World, also known as the State Department Publication 7277. It called for transferring control of the U.S. nuclear weapons to the United Nations, restricting the American military to the role of an internal police force and establishing an all-powerful UN army. Is almost word-for-word duplication of the disarmament proposal advanced by Khrushchev in 1959. Instead of peace, of course, it would guarantee war, because when the American people realize that they are being enslaved, they will strike back in righteous anger, regardless of the consequences. The monopoly capitalists see the New World Order as a way of gaining control of all natural and human resources, of monopolizing production and distribution and controlling the world market in their particular field of operation. Now, why do these people want to do this? I mean, they're in this country, they're enjoying the freedoms, but these are laissez-faire capitalists. They don't want competition. As Rockefeller said, competition is a sin. The only way you can avoid competition is if you have a one-world government and you don't allow any competition. The history of sustainable development is as follows, and you heard Rosa talk about this. 1987 was conceived the Brundtland Commission, chaired by Harlem Brundtland, the vice president of the World Socialist Party. In 1992, they came back 5 years later with a plan on how to implement that, and that became the Earth Summit in Rio. And it was the UN's 1,000-page report and strategy for sustainable development. It was signed, this Earth Summit, by 178 world leaders, including President George H.W. Bush. In 1993, President Clinton signed the Executive Order 12852, which established the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And in 2011, President Barack Obama signs Executive Order 13575, which established the White House Rural Council. So now we're having this United Nations agenda through ECLI in your local community. And they're coming from the ground up. And they're establishing the Biodiversity Treaty in every city in the country. And as you look at the map, you'll see how many cities worldwide are part of this ICLEI program for sustainable development. It's a takeover. George Washington observed in his farewell address, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations, but we have with them as little political connection as possible." This was our policy for the first 100 years as a nation. During the Napoleonic Wars, in the wake of the French Revolution, we remained neutral. Even with the war in England in 1812, it was done independently of other warring powers. After World War II, we were made to believe that it was our manifest destiny to make the world as safe from communism and other forms of terrorism. Most internationalists avoid using the term world government because it frightens the sheep or the geese. The quest for ultimate power required Rockefellers and other finance socialists and communists. In fact, we were unable to find a single thing that the Rockefellers put that actually was not communist-oriented or promoted free enterprise in any way. You know, again, John D. Rockefeller said competition is a sin. Monopoly capitalism is impossible unless you have government with the power to strangle would-be competitors, would-be monopolists. Therefore, want an all-powerful, centralized government because they can more easily control it. No competition is allowed. Socialism, in which a world government owns and controls all the major means of production, allows the monopolists to absolute control because they control the socialist state. Since they control all production, there'd be no industry which could offer a better or cheaper product unless we receive things from aliens. But I think the distance would probably prohibit that, transportation costs. Starting with the sellout of Eastern Europe to Joseph Stalin at Yalta and Potsdam, the U.S. State Department has had a policy of failing to support anti-communist friends. We look at the Shah of Iran, Anastasio Somoza of Nicaragua, Batista of Cuba, and Chiang Kai-shek of China. In every case, we pulled the rug out from under our anti-communist ally, only to see an avowed enemy assume power instead. With this revolutionary firing squads, Anatoly Khomeini has exterminated his enemies without any pretense of trial, Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. Zhou Enlai says, we communists are atheists, and then proceeded to kill 60 million of his own people. We have debates with atheists, and they keep saying, we are more moral than you guys are. So I had a whole list of the atrocities committed by so-called atheists, and after that they didn't bring that argument up anymore. We have a debate once a month. It's kind of fun. We may not win any debates, but we have fun doing it. I shouldn't say that because the last one we did, is this a Christian nation? And I had a friend of mine, Steve Jackson, and he did an amazing job. In fact, the atheists had nothing to say at the end. They had 18 minutes left, and they only used about 2 minutes of it because he had done such an excellent job. So the Sandinistas in Nicaragua have practiced unspeakable tortures and brutalities upon the Mosquito Indians, and others in Nicaragua have exported their Marxism revolution to the surrounding nations in Central America. In 1959, there was a sellout of Cuba by our State Department to known communist Fidel Castro. He was supposed to be the George Washington, but he wasn't anything like that, and we knew that. U.S. Ambassador Earl E.T. Smith, who was an envoy to Cuba at the time, has revealed that the U.S. State Department ordered him to sell Batista and to turn over the country to Castro. In 1961, our government betrayed Cuban people at the Bay of Pigs. No air support was given at that last moment, even though it had been promised to the Cuban freedom fighters. The rug was yanked out from under an attempt by Cuban patriots to take their country back from communist dictatorship. In 1963, there was an overthrow and subsequent murder of the Vietnam premier, Ngo Diem, a devout Catholic who had never taken a human life. The orders for his sellout came from Averell Harriman and Roger Hilsman of the U.S. State Department. So we see what's happening in our country. What do? They have to have an enemy. They sent Trotsky over with $20 million to support the Bolshevists. The property owners would never have allowed a communist takeover in Russia. So what we're seeing here is an attempt by people, insiders, to destroy the sovereignty of the United States, to set up a one-world government. That is Agenda 21. United Nations is a communist organization. This Department of Education was established by a communist. And there are certain things that we can do. Somebody said after you talk, I'm all depressed. Do you have anything positive to share? Well, no. I had a radio program, Questions on Common Core, and we just did a question and answer session, but there was some things that probably we would understand a little bit more if we understood their thinking, because it's pretty hard for us to believe something that doesn't make any sense. I have this problem, at least. I expect people to have some reason for doing the things that they're doing. Why destroy the greatest country in the world if for some reason, unless you had some reason for doing that? Or why institute things that are just totally nonsense? But I think it happens as people like Dr. Chisholm, he characterized this idea, and it's why Christians seem to be under attack under this Common Core curriculum, which is nothing more, again, than Agenda 21. And he says, the responsibility for charting the necessary changes in human behavior rests clearly on the sciences working in that field. Psychiatrists, psychologists, sociologists, economists, politicians must face this responsibility. We can identify the reasons why we fight wars. Why do we fight wars? Because Christians think that they're right. Many of them are easy to list: prejudice, isolationism, the ability to emotionally and uncritically believe unreasonable things, like God, for example. The only psychological force capable of producing these perversions is morality, the concept of right and wrong. So that's the enemy. For many generations, we have bowed our necks to the yoke of the conviction of sin. We have swallowed all manner of poisonous certainties, again, like the belief in God, the belief in family, the belief in loyalty, nationalism to our country. These are poisonous certainties, include all the unchanging truths and values that can't be compromised. That's why biblical Christianity was and continues to be incompatible with the world standards for mental health. Brock Chisholm was the president and founder of the World Health Organization. And I asked, what is the world? Is it sick? Does it need, medicine or what? No, he's talking about mental health. And of course, their idea of mental health is believing in totalitarianism and believing in globalism. And so if the student, the child, is not answering according to the way he's supposed to, he has to go take the test again until he gets it right. Well, this is a form of Skinnerian mind control, and it actually does work. I was wondering sometimes, how can people believe such stupid things? I taught cults and world religions for 20 years at Purdue. We hit one every week. And sometimes I would wonder, the more I study these cults, the more I realize, how can anybody believe the things that they are teaching? But, I'm going to be teaching on Jehovah's Witnesses later tonight, but they're screening the amount of information that comes to the people in their group. And they could be disfellowshipped by talking to somebody who's not part of their group, especially someone who has previously been disfellowshipped for some reason, because he understands the group. So they have to somehow curtail the information that is fed to these people. So they're making decisions based upon limited understanding, limited information. And you probably remember in that video that Rosa Corey, she kind of laughed when she said, be able to read well. Well, in that conference previous to that time, they showed the results of this reading program that's been implemented in many of the schools, which is Look-Say method, which was really a form to teach people who are deaf and dumb to be able to understand or to see visual pictures in their minds of words. It didn't even work very well for them either, but it certainly didn't work for our students, for those that didn't have problems. But that was implemented for the sole purpose of keeping them to be able to read. They don't want them to read because if you read, then you can absorb all this information and you can start learning what these people are saying is absolutely ridiculous. So this is being implemented now without the interference of these many godly teachers who are trying to do something to help the students. Now they can't buffer this information anymore. But this is Brock Chisholm, World Health Organization, what is meant by mental health. In 1972, Dr. Chester M. Pierce of Harvard University, in a keynote address to the Association for Childhood Education International in Denver, Colorado, stated, every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is insane because he comes to school with certain allegiances towards our founding fathers, towards his parents, towards the belief in a supernatural being, towards the sovereignty of this nation as a separate entity, and it's up to you to make the sick child well. So, this World Health Organization, WHO, has named the, quote, Nations for Mental Health. It's a guide to establish the national branches of this global network, and its website tells us that governments will be assisted to formulate, implement, and monitor and evaluate the mental health policies. These policies should enable all individuals whose mental health is disturbed, they start believing in God, or whose psychological balance may be compromised, to obtain services adapted to their needs and promote the optimal development of mental health of the population. Absolute control. And this is what she said, the ability to think is being destroyed in our children. We have a clear blueprint in place, announced Surgeon General David Snatcher at the National Healthy People Consortium meeting in 1998. Currently, 47 states are actively involved in Healthy People 2000 and Healthy City and Healthy Community initiatives are being pursued throughout the country. Hundreds of national organizations have reviewed the year 2000 objectives and have adopted them as their own. No priority yet has generated as much interest and enthusiasm as this one on mental health. Our efforts will be focused on maintaining a system of global health surveillance. They want to know if you're healthy. 400 data points on every student in the Common Core curriculum. So what is it? What is meant by the word prevention? Prevention implies a continual program of assessing, monitoring, and molding every mind before any evidence of unhealthy thinking occurs. So the problem is if these kids develop a sense of loyalty to the nation, a sense of honoring their parents. You think about it, the feral children usually never learn to talk. They're raised by wolves, so the child has to pretty much learn a language from his parents. He learns almost everything early in life from his parents. And what they're doing is destroying or neutralizing the effect of the father, particularly in the family. Since children develop rapidly, delivering mental health services and supports early and swiftly is necessary to avoid permanent consequences and ensure that children are ready for school. Emerging neuroscience highlights the ability of environmental factors to shape brain development and related behavior. A coordinated national approach to these issues will help eliminate social and emotional barriers to learning. What is meant by eliminate social and emotional barriers to learning might include Christian faith, biblical view of right and wrong, or parental objections to government interference, or constitutional rights that protect religious freedom. Instead, their therapy would be to target the sick masses of humanity, the main focus on the misguided individuals who stand on the uncompromising truths of the Bible. The war against Christian symbols and holidays may be the most obvious symptom that this is taking place throughout the country and the world. God has been banned from Christmas celebrations, art projects, seasonal songs, American history. Even a first grader's prayer has led to ridicule and reproof. So, what do we do about it? Now, most of my friends, they say, well, we're just going to stick our head in the ground, we're going to be ostriches and hope it goes away. But that's exposing your behind to being kicked. So I say, probably that's not a good idea. What you do, you want to be able to do something about it, and I think all of us here would try to help our children, help our country. Where does this stuff come from? Well, I was up to the last conference with Dr. Stanley Monteith. It was in 2012, and I kept calling him and saying, when are you going to do 2013? I'm ready. He said, I'm not doing it anymore. He's about 84, I think, and he's not putting on any more conferences. I was so glad I did go up there when I did. But he has seen this stuff happen. It took him a long time to realize that this is actually planned. Let's see. Good. So I'd like to show, one of the things that Stanley Monteith did is he showed that there was something in common, because if you read his book, he showed, well, he would convince you that it was the Bilderbergers who were behind this. Then he'd convince you that it was the Theosophists that were behind it. Then he'd show you that it was the Masons that were behind this whole thing, and he'd prove it to you. And then he would go through and show it that it was another group, maybe about 20 different groups. And finally he says they weren't all Jewish bankers. They weren't all Theosophists. They weren't all Masons. But they were all one thing. They were all deeply involved in the occult, and that's talking about the leaders. So I like to look at the occult roots of globalism. The ultimate goal of New Age movement is a one-world government, one world economic system, one world religion, and the four pillars upon which the New Age rests are evolution. Now, I do debates on evolution, and the first one we had with our atheists, I said, now, okay, you've got 10 million photoreceptor cells in the back of your eye. Each one can perform the equivalent of 500 nonlinear simultaneous differential equations 100 times a millisecond. So when you consider there's 10 million of them interacting with each other in complex ways, it would take a Cray supercomputer over 100 years to simulate what takes place in the back of your eye many times every second. And they say, well, the eye is very poorly designed because the photoreceptor cells are in the back of the eye, not in the front where the light's coming in. I said, have you seen the Mueller cells? The Mueller cells actually take that light and send it right back into the photoreceptor cell in the front. It's like a fiber optics cable, and light can bend in it. And then you've got all of the discharge because it's the most highly active cell in the body. Every 7 days we literally burn them up so that the blood takes them out, other cells capture them and transport them away, and new ones are brought in. Well, this is just one of the many things about our body that is so tremendously complex. Nobody can imagine how this could possibly happen naturally. And as I was talking to them last Tuesday night, well, it must be true because the scientists say it is. Well, I am a scientist, and I don't think it did happen that way. But the thing is, they have accepted it. Something that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. His invisible power and attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, so that they're without excuse. The firmament declares his handiwork. And yet they can somehow believe that everything happened naturally. Evolution is simply a way of explaining things without God. And that's one of the things that this Agenda 21 has to remove from the thinking of people, is the idea or concept of God whom we are responsible to. So, second is reincarnation. The idea that there is some opportunity for life after death. Well, we all kind of agree with that, but reincarnation is the opposite of resurrection. All cults and world religions, at least all that I know of, have three things in common. They have no original sin, therefore no need for a propitiatory sacrifice, and third, they have salvation after death. And this even includes groups that are fairly close to Christianity, like Eastern Orthodoxy, where salvation you can go out of hell into heaven after death by receiving prayers said on your behalf or sacraments done on your behalf. So we see that even amongst groups that are close. Astrology and meditation. Now, Robert Mueller belonged to the Lucas Trust, supported these objectives. He was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, and for many years his World Core curriculum was being taught and used through schools throughout the world, but he got it all from Alice Bailey, who channeled it from Occult, a demon. And this is what Alice Bailey's Education for a New Age is, what Robert Mueller used for his World Core curriculum, which was actually the grandfather of Common Core. Now, Alice Bailey's books, along with Madame Blavatsky's writings, are the foundation for New Age thought, and we look at things like Benjamin Disraeli, who wrote Coningsby, in a novel, a financier named Sidonia claimed the world was ruled by a secret cabal. Disraeli was obviously referring to Nathan Rothschild, who was the foremost powerful financier in the world, and they were both Masons. And what I'm kind of trying to show here is that these people are deeply involved in the occult. Both the American Civil Liberties Union and Anti-Defamation League have strong ties to Masonry. J.P. Morgan was instrumental in forcing our country into World War I. He and his associates funded the Bolsheviks and Nazis to help organize the Council on Foreign Relations. Occult writers tell us he based his investment strategy on astrology. Now, you probably remember Colonel Edwin Mandell House. He manipulated the leaders of the Western world during the early decades of the 20th century, helped J.P. Morgan organize a Council on Foreign Relations. After World War I, he kept and distributed copies of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion at Yale University, and he was an occultist. Now, probably understand Mandell House. You go back to Plato, actually. And there was a man, John Ruskin, who used to read Plato every night. He was given an opportunity to teach at Oxford University, and he taught the concepts in Plato's Republic. Plato didn't believe in marriage. He didn't believe that people should own property. And these things, one of his students was a fellow who was mentioned in Carol Quigley's book, who actually was the one responsible for I'll get to it later. Henry Ford built an automobile. He built his automotive factories for both communists and Nazis, received a medal from Adolf Hitler, wrote the International Jew, which claimed Jewish bankers financed Bolshevism, which is not true. He distributed anti-Semitic literature through his newspaper. Thomas Edison was also a theosophist and his close friend. And investigating committee for financing, including the Pacific Institute for Pacific Relations, which brought communism to China. Henry Ford was also a spiritualist and a 33rd degree Mason. Andrew Carnegie and Cecil Rhodes were friends. both the directors of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace planned World War I and then mounted the propaganda campaign to force us into that war. So what they had done, and this was basically, Cecil Rhodes was the one who John Ruskin had persuaded in his class at Oxford that we should have a one world government. Well, he ended up buying the diamond mines and the gold mines in South Africa, became one of the richest men in the world, and had 7 wills. The first 5 wills were to establish this secret organization. The 7th will was to set up the Rhodes Foundation, the Rhodes Scholarship, to train these people. So they were also responsible with Rothschilds for starting the Federal Reserve. So in 1910, they met on a little island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island, and they, in 2 weeks, hammered out the plans for this Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve could print money on virtually with paper and ink. They didn't have anything to back it necessarily. Well, in 1913, it was Colonel House that was actually able to push it through Congress, and so now we have a Federal Reserve system that can print money, and now it is accepted as legal tender. Now they had a way of printing money out of nothing, and the income tax was also established in 1913, which was illegal according to the Supreme Court in 1889. Now they established it saying that we'd only have 1% tax, it would never increase. Well, that's what happens. They get something in the door and then they change it later on. So now they had a way of raising money, they had a way of printing money, but now they needed a way of making interest on that money, and so they needed to get the government in debt enough so that they could need to borrow money from the Federal Reserve. That's what got us into World War I. I've seen charts which sees we're paying off our debt, and all of a sudden we go into war and it goes back up. We start to pay off our debt again, and World War II comes along. Both of those wars were planned by this group. So, there is something that's interesting. President Truman carried a copy of Lord Tennyson's poem in his wallet throughout his life. He packed the United Nations, the United States Supreme Court with Masons, ceded China to Eastern Europe to the communists, created a national United Nations, involved us in a no-win war in Korea, and fired General MacArthur when he wanted to win that war. Harry Truman was a 33rd degree Mason. And Winston Churchill referred to Lord Tennyson's poem as, quote, the most wonderful of modern prophecies. During World War I, he was responsible for the British invasion of Gallipoli, where 216,000 British soldiers and 150,000 Turks fell in battle. During the World War II, he insisted on the invasion of North Africa despite the opposition of our military planners. Then he did everything he could to delay the invasion of Europe. He opposed an invasion of southern France, insisted on invading Italy, brought Marshal Tito to power in Yugoslavia despite the fact that he was a communist, and intentionally prolonged the war for over a year. That delay resulted in millions of additional deaths. Most of the Holocaust victims died in that last portion. They would have been saved had he allowed them to enter Germany. Winston Churchill was a Mason and a Druid. Richard Wurmbrand discovered that Marx was not an atheist. He was a Satanist. Now, Richard Wurmbrand, he wrote a book called Tortured for Christ, and he had spent a good portion of his life in prison camp. And after he finally got out, he decided, I'm going to understand what communism is all about. So he did a very detailed study and found out that actually Karl Marx dedicated his life to Satan at an early age. Mikhail Gorbachev was a dictator of the USSR and director of the Soviet KGB before he came to the United States. Maurice Strong, Stephen Rockefeller, and Mikhail Gorbachev are the ones that wrote the Earth Charter. Now, the Earth Charter is the basis of much of our education system. What's the one that they have for gifted children? Earth Charter was at its foundation. Gorbachev stated that World Forum meetings always have an underlining theme of occultism. And one of my favorite characters is Barbara Marx Hubbard. She was one of the leaders of the New Age movement. In her book, The Book of Co-Creation, which was channeled by a spirit she called the Christ Light, she describes the hidden meaning of Revelation 6:8. You've probably been wondering what the meaning of that is. And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and his name sat on him. The name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And the power was given to them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. The demon Christ Light explained the true meaning of the passage. Out of the full spectrum of human personality, 1/4 is electing to transcend with all their heart, mind, and soul. 1/4 is resistant to election. They are unattracted by life ever evolving. That's Christians. Their higher self is unable to penetrate the density of their mammalian senses. They cannot be reached. They are defective seeds. We're defective seeds. Now, as we approach the quantum shift from creature human to co-creative human, the destructive 1/4 must be eliminated from the social body. Fortunately, you, dearly beloveds, are not responsible for this act. We are. We are in charge of God's selection process for planet Earth. He selects, we destroy. We are the riders on the pale horse, death. We come to bring death to those who are unable to know God. Now, this is the New Age God. But those that know the true God, we're the enemy. So they're going to get rid of us. The riders of the pale horse are about to pass among you. Grim reapers, they will separate the wheat from the chaff. And this is a painful period in human history. So she was consultant for the Department of Defense. So now we go to extraterrestrials. New Agers believe that humanity evolved from or was created by aliens, that specific New Age leaders have made contact with aliens, or humanity will make contact with aliens in the future, and this kind of brings us to what this conference is all about. Well, not all New Agers believe in extraterrestrials, but many do. And most New Agers will say that the world is of the same essence as God, only the slower vibratory energy. So it's a form of pantheism. Pantheism believes all is God. Panentheism teaches that God is in everything. The higher vibration is supposed to be pure spirit, whereas lower vibration is supposed to be that of matter. So here's a picture of some of the New Age beliefs. And of course, most of you are familiar with most of these. And this is what we see happening. Some of our leaders in the New Age movement. And you wonder what happens after death to the New Ager. Well, after death, you go into one of the higher astral planes. It can be one of the causal planes. This is where these demons are channeled from, is from the mental or causal plane. The higher astral planes are where Christians call heaven. Lower astral planes would be the demonic areas. These would be demons. The intermediate astral planes would be where a young child would go until he reaches maturity, and then eventually you'll meet your parents. Here's a picture of this. This is a form of spiritism. This is what's taught in the theosophical cults. This is what they believe, various vibratory consciousness where you go after you die. So it's a form of reincarnation. So we're still evolving today. We're just evolving unconsciously, and we're not evolving physically. So David Spangler worked clairvoyantly with a group of non-physical beings from inner worlds of spirit, identified themselves as part of the inner school whose purpose was to explore and develop a spiritual teaching around a process of incarnation. So incarnational spirits they talked about. We have people like Ruth Montgomery. Every person is God. We are as much God is a part of us. Each of us is God. Together we are God. This is an all for one, one for all makes us a whole of God. That's, of course, the lie that that Satan taught to Eve. By asserting that man is God, the cosmic humanist grants each individual the power of determining reality by co-creating or creating truth. So we're into total postmodernism. Everybody creates their own truth. Now, existentialism says every man is a law unto themselves, but that doesn't work in society, because if everybody makes up their own law, that's not going to work. So we go to a postmodern idea, which is every community develops their own established laws. Since there is no God, There is no final authority for anything. We establish our own particular laws, and of course, what happens when one society believes it's okay to kill the infidel and others don't believe in killing, they have a little bit of a problem when they run into each other. Well, once we begin to see that we are God, says Beverly Gann, that we all have the attributes of God, then I think the whole purpose of human life is to re-own the God-likeness within us, the perfect love, the perfect wisdom, the perfect understanding, the perfect intelligence, and when we do that, we create back to the old, the essential oneness, which is consciousness. Now, in essence, we're not individuals. We're part of universal consciousness, which is God. Realizing this essential unity, experiencing oneself as part of it, is a major goal for a child's education, to realize his own godhood. Because each person is part of the universal consciousness, which is love. Each child contains all the wisdom of the love of the universe. This love is the higher self. The children can tap into the universal mind and receive advice. They're talking about tapping into power animals and various other things. They're making contacts with demonic spirits, spirit guides. And one example in the college-level textbook that most often used in freshman level, the text is Becoming a Master Student, includes a chapter titled You Create It All, in which the students are told that they create everything, including the lectures they attend, the textbooks, their instructors, and their classmates. All those things are absolutely certain they do not control, like the weather, wars, and hunger, and in actuality, they create those too. So this is the insanity that we're seeing in this New Age movement, which goes along with what's going on in school today. One of my favorite characters is Jack Underhill. He explains what would happen if everybody in the world were to connect with his or her own godhood. They could turn off the sun and turn it back on. They could freeze oceans into ice. They could turn air into gold, talk as one with no movement or sound. They could fly without wings, love without pain, cure with no more than a thought or a smile. They can make the earth go backwards and bounce up and down, crack it in half, or shift it around. There's nothing they could not do. So, what is the agenda of the New World, the New Age? It's the same as the New World Order. It's to a one world government, universal credit card system, World Food Authority, World Health Authority, World Water Authority, universal tax, universal military draft, abolishing Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and a one world leader. Now, there is so much that I could share with individuals, but I didn't want to spend too much time with this. I wanted to get into something. One of my favorite books is Plant Communication. But we have to look at some of the, but if from thence thou seek the Lord thy God with, thou shalt find him if thou seek him with all thy heart and soul. So this is a challenge. I tell the atheists, I tell the people who I'm talking to, I said, no, I'm on your side. He says, any man that seeks me with his whole heart will find me. In China, Watchman Nee was surrounded by atheists, and he said, you know, God, all he requires is a honest heart. So if you say, look, I don't believe in you, God, but Lord, if you're real, I want to know you, help my unbelief. He'll answer that prayer. And that's what I tell these atheists. I said, God, you can start anywhere you want, but you just ask God, hey, if I don't believe in you, but if I do, if you're there, then help me to understand. Well, one of my favorite areas is that they believe that they can create matter from nothing. And the idea was, well, let's see, energy, an apple, you eat an apple, it creates energy, which creates thoughts. And so if you can turn matter into energy, then why can't we turn energy, thought energy, into matter? So they could create, and this is co-creation, they could create an apple, a real apple, not just an imaginary apple, just by thinking. That's what they believe. And I want to just apologize for this. Yeah, this is mental alchemy. This is interesting. Takes a while here. Fessler writes, all scientists agree that matter can be converted to energy. Surely the reverse is possible. Energy must be capable of converting to matter. Mind is energy. Thought is energy. We eat an apple and it becomes energy. It becomes mind. Why is it so difficult for some people to grasp that thought is capable of becoming an apple? Why not an imagined apple? Not an imagined apple, but a real one. Materialism is possible. This is creative visualization. Agnes Sanford teaches that mental training is required to develop the creative facility. It doesn't come naturally, but you can develop it. This is a teaching of Christian Science and some of the modern cults. So, again, this is postmodernism. Postmodernists believe that God is non-existent, but they believe that they can, truth is whatever you decide it is, whatever your community decides it. Richard Rorty says if he says the moon is made of green cheese and his community does not disagree with him, then for him the moon is made of green cheese. This is the idea of my truth and your truth. We create our own truth because there is no absolute truth. And then they get up with this polysemy, the idea of multiple meanings. So something can mean two opposite things. You can deconstruct all literature and make it mean whatever you want or your particular group wants it to mean. I often deal with Islam. We debated Muslims over there in England, and the leading debater in the Muslim side, Shabir Ali, came up to me and said, we, meaning the Muslims, had lost all debates. I had lost all 7 debates. And I said, well, that's understandable. Let's see. Islam teaches that, there was no miracles that Muhammad did in the Quran, so they were looking for a miracle they could ascribe to him, and the only thing they could come up with was the Quran itself. So I said, well, what does the Quran teach? It teaches there are 7 earths, flat like a carpet, separated by 500 years, that's walking years, sitting on top of this large fish called a noon, which is on top of a bowl, which is on top of a cube, which is on top of dust, and only Allah knows what's under the dust. And above the 7th earth, which is where we are 8 giant goats with 500 years between their front hooves and their back hooves, shooting stars or missiles God throws at demons to keep them out of heaven, and the sun sets in a murky pool surrounded by a bunch of people. So what did Muhammad get in the right in the area of cosmology and cosmogony? Absolutely nothing. And yet this is the only evidence that Muhammad was a prophet or Islam is true. And then we go in the human hygiene, talks about that if a fly falls in your soup, one wing has the germs, the other has the antidote, so you just dip it down and it'll be fine. You throw the fly away, afterwards you don't want to eat that, but I've debated Muslims over the antidote in one wing of a fly. And they were asking, well, since Satan dwells in your nose at night, it's okay then you have to do an ablution to purify yourself, so you sniff the water up your nose and out your mouth 3 times. And they ask, his followers ask, is it okay to use the water from the pool of Buddha that had menstrual claws, human excrement, and dead animals, but according to Muhammad, nothing could pollute the water. Now, what did he get right in the area of human hygiene? Well, drinking camel urine mixed with milk is supposed to have great medicinal value. Of all the things, he didn't get a single thing right there, and there were 17 things in the human birth process. He got none of those right. And yet that's the only evidence that Islam is true. So I just, for fun, we were looking at some of the insights in Islam. God bless Hitler, moral clarity, respectful children, and then, of course, this is my favorite, in 2007, Islam and Judaism's holiest days overlapped for 10 days. Muslims racked up 397 dead bodies and 94 terror attacks across 10 countries during this time, while the Jews worked on their 159th Nobel Prize. They don't like that. But then I have this Taliban singles online. Let's see. Age 35, location cave, occupation not allowed, income not allowed, hobbies not allowed. I am a man seeking to own woman, camel, goat. Yeah, anyway. This is women, somebody asked about their garments. Now this here, the hijab, this weighs up to 13 pounds, almost as much, 16 pounds, about as much as a bowling ball. It goes down to the ground. You cannot Yeah. Yeah, I'm watching. Shut up. I will. Yeah, it was kind of fun because they can only see a foot in front of them, and so that a lot of them got run over because they have no peripheral vision. It's pretty sad. Now, what I wanted to share a little bit tonight was something which I won't have time to do, but I guess I'm going to be on tomorrow, so I'll be able to share a little bit about the political aspects of the manipulation that is happening to us through Agenda 21. And so we will do that tomorrow. Some of the things that are happening are pretty scary. The fact is that it's happening around us, and many of us, it's being done, but it's being done in a way that people don't see it. So we need to open our eyes and help open the eyes of those around us. It is preventable. There are things that we can do, and tomorrow I'd like to share a little bit more of what we can actually do to stop the tide that seems to be almost insurmountable. In fact, Rosa Corey, basically, and she lives in California, she would go to these meetings, and absolutely, she and several others, they can actually just turn them upside down. There's things that you can do. In fact, her book, Behind the Green Mask, gives details on how to effectively combat Agenda 21. So with that, I'd like to close, and thank you for your time.